In this talk, we're going to learn about the general characteristics of plants. We will first begin with the evolution of terrestrial plants, followed by learning about the alternation of generations. We will then learn about the classification of plants and compare non-vascular plants and vascular plants. Plants are multicellular autotrophic organisms that have the ability to fix gaseous carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to make sugars using sunlight. All plants have evolved from freshwater algae, and we should remember that algae belong to the kingdom of Protista, unlike plants who belong to the kingdom of Plantae. Most protists are unicellular, but there are algae that are multicellular. These multicellular algae, in spite of having many cells, these cells do not work together as a cohesive unit as they do in multicellular organisms like plants. In this figure, we are able to see different types of algae, which include the red and the green algae. We do have brown algae too that have not been shown here. All multicellular and terrestrial plants evolved from green algae. During the evolution of green algae, two main groups arose, which are the chlorophytes and the charophytes. The charophytes are the ones that finally evolved to give rise to first non-vascular plants. These non-vascular plants, like the mosses, went ahead and underwent further evolution to give rise to vascular plants. The life cycle of plants shows a phenomenon called as alternation of generations. We're going to look at two main structures that are formed and how they alternate during the plant's life cycle. The first one is the gametophyte. This is a haploid part of the plant, and the gametophyte is the one that is able to give rise to the gametes. We have the male gametes, which are the sperm, and the female gametes that are the egg. These gametes undergo fertilization or fusion to give rise to a diploid zygote. The diploid zygote then undergoes development to form an embryo. This embryo then matures to form a sporophyte. The sporophyte then can go ahead and form sporangia, and the sporangia can give rise to spores after undergoing meiosis. These spores can then germinate to form the gametophyte, and the life cycle goes on once again. Thus, plants show the presence of a haploid gametophyte and a diploid sporophyte during their life cycle. Depending on the presence of conducting channels or tissues, plants can be classified into two main groups: the non-vascular plants and the vascular plants. The non-vascular plants evolved first and do not have any type of conducting channels or tissues that can transport nutrients and water throughout the plant. Vascular plants evolved from non-vascular plants and do show the presence of conducting channels or tissues that allow the transport of nutrients and water throughout the plant. Non-vascular plants grow abundantly in moist places. This is because they do not have water-conducting tracheids or cells that help transport water throughout the plant, which makes them dependent on moisture in the environment. They do possess anchoring systems called rhizoids, and these rhizoids help anchor the plant in place, but they also allow the plant to absorb water. There are primitive rudimentary root-like structures, but it's important to remember that they are not true roots. Non-vascular plants show a life cycle that has a dominant gametophyte, which is the haploid stage of the plant's life cycle. There are three main groups of non-vascular plants, which include the liverworts, the mosses, and the hornworts, and collectively they're also called as bryophytes. Non-vascular plants do show asexual mode of reproduction, But they also are able to demonstrate sexual modes of reproduction, which gives rise to genetic diversity. Unlike non-vascular plants, vascular plants show the presence of a dominant sporophyte in their life cycle. This is the diploid part of the plant's life cycle. They do show the presence of the haploid gametophyte, but this gametophyte is much smaller in size than the sporophyte. Vascular plants have evolved water-conducting channels or tissues, as well as nutrient-transporting tissues, and both of these are called as vascular tissues. Xylem is an example of a vascular tissue that enables the transport of water throughout the plant, while phloem is another type of vascular tissue that aids in the transport of nutrients like sugars. The evolution of vascular tissues has allowed the vascular plants to have well-developed roots and leaves. The roots are the ones that help in the absorption of water, while the leaves are the part of the plant that performs photosynthesis to make the sugars. Vascular plants show the presence of specialized spore-bearing leaves called sporophylls, and this is where the gametophyte will develop in the plant. There are different types of vascular plants that includes the lycophytes, which are also called as club mosses, the pterophytes, which include the ferns, as well as plants that make seeds, which are the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. With this, we come to the end of our talk, where we learned about the evolution of plants, the phenomenon of alternation of generations, which include a diploid sporophyte and a haploid gametophyte, the classification of plants based on the presence of vascular tissues, as well as the comparison of non-vascular and vascular plants.